Ever feel like you're just, existing, going through the motions? Like, wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat. Maybe scroll through some memes in between. You all start to feel a little, well, unstoryworthy. But what if I told you there's magic hidden in the mundane? That even your life, yes, yours, is bursting with compelling stories. That's what we're diving into today. With Matthew Dix's book, Storyworthy, it's not just about telling stories, but about seeing them everywhere. Dix, by the way, is this storytelling machine. He's won tons of slams, even been on the Moth. But the cool thing is he believes everyone has a story worth telling. Not just the dramatic stuff either. He actually thinks the most relatable stories come from everyday life. He calls it homework for life, this practice of noticing the little things, the funny moments, the tiny struggles. Suddenly waiting for the bus isn't just boring. It's a potential anecdote about that guy who always wears mismatched socks. I've been trying it, and you know what? He's onto something. I used to think my life was pretty average story-wise. But then I started paying attention. Like the other day, I was trying to buy a plan online, and the website kept glitching. Every time I click add a cart, it'd freeze. I was so frustrated. But then I thought, hey, that's relatable, right? The struggle is real. Even houseplants can be dramatic. Now, Dix has this core concept, the 5-second moment. He believes every good story boils down to one pivotal moment of change. Not just the event itself, but the emotional shift. Like in his story, Charity Thief, he gets a flat tire with no cash, ends up pretending to collect for charity, feeling pretty low. But then he meets this widower who's lost his wife and dog recently, and bam, that's the 5-second moment. Suddenly, Dix realizes his problems are tiny compared to this guy's grease. It's that shift in perspective, that emotional punch that makes the story stick. So it's not about the flat tire, it's about empathy. Pretty cool, right? And here's where Diggs gets super practical. He's not just saying find your story, he's saying here's how you tell it. And it all starts at the beginning. Think about it, you wouldn't start a movie trailer with a boring scene, right?
You jump right into the action. Dick says storytelling is the same. Start as close to that 5-second moment as possible. Don't bore people with backstory. Like in his honeymoon story, he doesn't start with the flight. He jumps right to their rental car, breaking down in a sketchy part of town. Suddenly you're hooked. You want to know what happens next. And to keep you on the edge of your seat, Dix uses breadcrumbs, little hints of what's to come. Like he might mention a character's fear of heights early on, knowing it'll come back later when they're stuck on a Ferris wheel. Just an example. He also uses crystal balls, which are like false predictions. He'll make you think something's going to happen, then surprise you with a twist. It's all about keeping the audience engaged and wondering what's coming next. I totally fall for those tricks. Like the other day, I was convinced I'd failed this online quiz. Turns out I aced it. Sometimes even we're surprised by our own story is right. But Dix doesn't stop there. He goes beyond structure into making even ordinary moments feel extraordinary. One technique he loves is but, and therefore, sounds simple, right? But it's genius.
Instead of just listing events, you connect them with but or therefore, adding this sense of cause and effect. Like life is happening to you. Instead of, I went to the store, I bought milk, I came home, it's, I went to the store, but they were out of my usual milk. Therefore, I had to try that almond stuff. Suddenly, there's a story arc even in grocery shopping. And this ties into what Dix calls making it little to tell a big story. It's not about the grand events, but the emotional core. Like he has this story about his wife picking her first Christmas tree. She's Jewish, and he describes it as 7 feet wide and 3 feet tall. Now that's obviously exaggerated, but it's funny because it's specific. It tells us about her personality, about their relationship, about the whole fish out of water situation. It's a little detail that speaks volumes, right? So we've covered finding the story, the 5-second moment at the beginning, but what about making it funny? Dix is big on humor, and he has a technique called milk cans and baseballs. Weird name, great concept. It's about using unexpected language and playful exaggeration. Instead of saying the box was heavy, you say, it felt like I was carrying a milk can full of baseballs. Suddenly it's funny and memorable. I try this all the time. Like the other day, I was telling a friend about this massive spider I found in my bathroom. Instead of just saying it was huge, I said it was the size of a small dog. Okay, maybe a slight exaggeration, but I got to laugh. And that's the thing about humor. It often comes from truth, but amped up a bit. Those awkward, embarrassing moments. Pure comedic gold. Dix even argues that storytelling can make you funnier in general. It's about seeing the world through that lens, finding those unexpected connections. Now, all this storytelling talk might make you think it's just about entertaining people. But Dix goes deeper. He sees storytelling as a superpower, a way to connect, build empathy, understand each other better. Think about the stories that have moved you. Were they all car chases and explosions? Or were they the ones that made you feel something, that made you see the world through someone else's eyes? I remember reading The Kite Runner in college. Powerful story about friendship and betrayal set in Afghanistan. It totally transported me, made me understand things I'd never even considered before. That's the power of a good story. Dix argues that storytelling can break down barriers, bridge divides. In a world that often feels polarized, that's pretty powerful stuff. And the key to connecting: vulnerability. When we share our own stories, our struggles, our imperfections, it gives others permission to do the same. It shows we're all human, We all mess up. We all have things we're working through. Sure, sharing can be scary. Putting yourself out there, letting people see your flaws. It's not always easy, but it's also incredibly rewarding, because when you share your story, you're inviting someone else to share theirs. You're building a bridge. And those bridges, they can lead to amazing places. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't even our own. They're the ones we hear from others, the ones that open our eyes to different experiences, different ways of being in the world. Like, I remember hearing this story on the radio about a woman who'd been homeless for years. She talked about the struggles, the discrimination, the constant fight for survival. It was heartbreaking, but it also made me see homelessness differently. It made me realize these are people with stories, with dreams, with hopes, and it made me want to do something to help. That's what storytelling can do, right? Inspire us to act, to make a difference. It reminds us that everyone has a story worth hearing, even if it's on a cheesy reality show.
Yeah.
And sometimes those stories can be more impactful than anything in a novel. And Dix has this kind of like interesting idea, He calls it the elephant, which is like the central question or, main point of your story. The thing you want to leave your audience with, the thing that makes them go, huh, right? It's like the hook that keeps them interested, keeps them wondering what's going to happen next. He says you should state it clearly early on, almost like a movie trailer. For example, if you're telling a story about getting lost in the woods, your elephant might be, I was lost in the woods with no phone, no food, and no idea how to get back. And bam, just like that. You've got your audience's attention. They're immediately thinking, how'd you get lost? What happened? Did you survive? Yeah. But here's the cool thing. Dix says your elephant can change color throughout the story. It's like a chameleon adapting to the different twists and turns of the narratives. So what started as a story about being lost might evolve into a story about resilience or resourcefulness, or even the kindness of strangers who helped you find your way back home. It's like storytelling itself is a journey, an exploration, And the elephant, it's kind of like your guide, keeping the audience engaged and leading them towards that ultimate aha moment, that 5-second moment where everything changes. I've been playing around with this elephant concept in my own stories. And it's amazing how much it can elevate a story. I have this story about going on a blind date that was a complete disaster. I mean, we had nothing in common. The conversation was awkward, and I was pretty sure I'd never see this person again. But when I tell the story, I start with the elephant. I went on a blind date, and it was the most awkward experience of my life, right off the bat. That sets the tone, The audience knows they're in for a story about awkwardness, maybe some humor, and they're wondering what could possibly go wrong. And as I tell the story, the elephant starts to shift. It goes from being about awkwardness to being about amusement. And then it becomes about this shared understanding that sometimes blind dates just don't work out. And in the end, it becomes a story about accepting the unexpected, about finding humor in the uncomfortable and learning to laugh at yourself. That's the beauty of the elephant. It guides the story, keeps the audience engaged, and it ultimately leads them to a moment of truth. Dix also talks about using sensory details to bring your stories to life, making the audience feel like they're right there with you, experiencing the sight, sounds, smells, tastes, and textures of your story. For example, if you're telling a story about a summer day at the beach, don't just say it was a hot day. Describe the feeling of the sun beating down on your skin, the smell of sunscreen and salty air, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore, the taste of ice cream melting on your tongue. When you use those sensory details, you create a much more vivid picture in the audience's mind. And it's like they're right there with you, digging their toes in the sand. It's like you're painting a picture with words, creating a multi-sensory experience that really draws the audience in. I remember telling a story about going on a road trip with my friends. We were driving through the desert and it was scorching hot. And I described the heat in detail, like how the sun felt like a giant magnifying glass, how the air was shimmering and dancing, how even the cacti looked like they were sweating. And people were like, wow, I could feel the heat. I felt like I was right there with you. That's the power of sensory details. They create a sense of immersion, like you're bringing the audience right into this story with you. Another thing Dix talks about is using strong verbs. Verbs are those action words that drive the story forward, the words that give it energy and momentum, right? And when you use strong, vivid verbs, it can make your story so much more impactful and engaging. Like instead of saying, I walked down the street, you could say, I sauntered down the street, or I strutted down the street, or I ambled down the street. Each verb creates a different image, a different feeling, a different sense of movement. So those little nuances, those are what make the difference, you know. It's like you're choosing the right paintbrush to create a masterpiece. Strong verbs can add depth and texture and vibrancy to your storytelling, making it more captivating for your audience. I remember telling a story about going hiking in the mountains, and instead of just saying I climbed the mountain, I used more descriptive verbs. I talked about how I scrambled over rocks, slogged through mud, and huffed and puffed my way up those steep inclines. And those strong verbs, they really conveyed the effort, the determination, the physicality of the experience you know. And you can use metaphors and similes too. Those are figures of speech that compare two seemingly unrelated things, and they can really spark the imagination and add a deeper layer of meaning to your story. Like instead of saying I was nervous, you could say I felt like a butterfly trapped in a jar. Or instead of saying the sunset was beautiful, you could describe it as a fiery tapestry painted across the sky. Metaphors and similes, they can create a sense of wonder, a sense of beauty, a sense of emotional depth, and make your story so much more evocative and memorable. I actually love using metaphors and similes in my own stories. Like I tell this story about having to give a presentation in front of a huge audience, and I was absolutely terrified. To describe my nervousness, I said, I felt like a deer caught in the headlights. It's a pretty common metaphor, but it perfectly captures that feeling of being frozen overwhelmed by fear. Plus, it adds a touch of humor, which can be a great way to connect with the audience. Metaphors and similes. They're like little gifts you give to your audience, inviting them to see the world through your eyes and experience those emotions and sensations in a more vivid, impactful way. Dix is all about crafting these captivating stories right. But he also acknowledges that sometimes life just throws us curveballs. Sometimes things happen that are so unexpected, so shocking, so overwhelming, that it's hard to find the story in the midst of the chaos. And it's in those moments that he suggests embracing what he calls the messy middle. The messy middle is that part of the story where things aren't neat and tidy, where there's no clear resolution, where we're just trying to make sense of what's happening. Imagine telling a story about a time you went through a major life change. Maybe you lost your job, or you went through a breakup, or you moved to a new city. Those experiences, they can be messy, right? They're full of uncertainty and doubt and fear and confusion. And it's tempting to try to gloss over those messy parts, to rush to the resolution, to tie everything up in a neat little bow. But Dick says that's a mistake, because it's in those messy middles, in those moments of uncertainty and vulnerability, that we often find the most profound truths, most powerful lessons, the most meaningful connections. I remember telling this story about going through a really tough breakup, and I was heartbroken. Just devastated. And for a long time, I didn't want to talk about it, let alone tell a story about it. But then I realized that the messy middle, The part where I was raw and vulnerable and struggling to put the pieces back together. That was the part that really resonated with people. Because we've all been there, right? We've all experienced heartbreak, loss, disappointment. And it's in those moments of shared vulnerability, when we're willing to be open and honest about our struggles, that we connect with each other on a deeper level and realize we're not alone. So when you're crafting your stories, don't be afraid to embrace the messy middle. Don't shy away from the difficult emotions, the unanswered questions, the uncertain outcomes. Those are the parts that make your story real, relatable, and ultimately more meaningful. And you know, one of the most powerful things about storytelling is that it allows us to connect with people on a deeper level, to share something meaningful that makes them think, something that stays with them long after the story is over. And one of the most powerful ways to do that is to find that universal truth at the heart of your story. What is that underlying message? That core idea, that emotional nugget that resonates with people because it speaks to a shared human experience. Like I tell this story about going on a solo backpacking trip through Europe. On the surface, it's an adventure story about exploring new places and experiencing different cultures. But at its core, it's really a story about self-discovery, about stepping outside my comfort zone, about learning to rely on myself and embrace the unknown. And that's a universal truth that resonates with people, even if they've never backpacked through Europe. Because we've all had those moments where we've had to step outside our comfort zones, where we've had to face our fears, where we've had to navigate the unknown. And it's those experiences, those challenges, those moments of growth that shape us. They change us. They make us who we are. And that's what makes storytelling so powerful. It allows us to share those universal truths, those shared human experiences in a way that connects us, that inspires us, and that reminds us that we're not alone in our journeys. So how do you find the universal truth in your own stories? Dick suggests starting by asking yourself some questions. What did I learn from this experience? How did this experience change me? What message do I want to convey to my audience? These questions can help you dig deep to uncover that underlying meaning that makes your story resonate with people. Because it's not just about the events themselves, it's about what those events reveal, about who we are, what we value, how we see the world. And when you can tap into that universal truth, you can create stories that are not just entertaining, but meaningful, impactful, and transformative. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, from finding those story-worthy moments to crafting them, structuring them, even making them funny. And if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, like, whoa, that's a lot to take in, I totally get it. Storytelling can feel daunting, right? But here's the thing. Dick's book, Storyworthy, it's not just a how-to guide. It's an invitation. It's an invitation to see the world differently, to find the magic in the mundane, to embrace the power of your own experiences. It's a reminder that we all have stories worth telling, stories that can connect us, inspire us, and maybe even change the world one heart at a time. So if you're looking for a way to tap into your own storytelling superpower, to make your life feel a little more meaningful, a little more vibrant, a little more story-worthy, I highly recommend checking out Storyworthy. It might just change your life one story at a time. And that's it for today's deep dive. Thanks for listening.